Kyle and Jackie O. It's the story that just won't go away, and I certainly haven't helped. Today, I revealed new information about the ongoing saga in the weekly Inside Mail column in the Daily Mail. Here's the new twist I revealed today. Henderson, say our sources, was contracted to the station, not the breakfast show. That means she was not, strictly speaking, breaking her contract if she were willing to broadcast elsewhere during the day. What has been unclear in this sorry saga is the reason ARN terminated her contract, saying she could no longer work with Sandilands after a blow-up. And honestly, who hasn't said something heated after a workplace row? Hardly passes the pub test as a legitimate reason for dismissal. But rather than have me pretending to play lawyer, let's bring in the professional. Michael Burns is a partner at Swaab and often heard on 2GB. Michael, welcome to McKnight Tonight. Happy Tipsy Thursday. We need a drink to deal with this.
Thanks, Rob. We sure do. And I've got my wine here as well. Good to join you to discuss this issue.
Yeah, look, there is a lot to cover. First, when this first happened and ARN made the statement to the ASX, it could be assumed they terminated Jackie's contract because I assumed at the time she was contracted to the breakfast show. It seems she could no longer do that show because she couldn't work with Kyle. Now, if my sources are correct regarding the details of her contract, in that she was actually contracted to the station overall, not the breakfast show. And I've got to tell you, this information comes from very trusted sources. I really can't see how ARN had cause to terminate her contract. Can you?
It certainly seems to weaken their position, Rob, because what they were saying, if you go back to the market statement that ARN issued to the ASX, bearing in mind here that when you're talking about PR statements, media statements, sometimes they gild the lily. Sometimes They're not entirely honest. But when you're making a statement to the ASX, you have to be absolutely, scrupulously honest and correct and candid. And so that statement said that Jackie O can no longer work with Carl Sandilands. Accordingly, that's the word they used, accordingly, ARN is terminating the contract with Henderson Media, which is Jackie's service company. So they drew this direct link between Jackie O not being able to work with Kyle anymore and the termination of the contract, which suggests that the contract, what was crucial or pivotal to the contract, was her ability to continue performing as part of the Kyle and Jackie O show. This information... Yeah.
Sorry, Michael, I was just going to say, they have spoken previously that they are on separate contracts. So
I heard that, yes.
They do not have to be with each other. And that's why it was a natural assumption I made that it must have had specific wording about the breakfast show. But I promise you, the sources are so good on this that it sounds like she was contracted to the station. So the fact that ARN terminated her when she brought up an issue, it's just mind-boggling.
So I think it weakens, and bear in mind, I haven't seen the contract. And obviously a lawyer talking about a contract they haven't seen, it's a bit of a fool's errand. But for discussion purposes and assuming the information you have is correct, it does seem to weaken ARN's position in relation to the termination of Jackie's contract. Legally, what happened with Jackie's position, this is drawn from the market statement, is that Jackie could no longer perform the services or no longer work with Kyle Sandilands. And so therefore, would be the reasoning, could no longer perform the services contemplated by the contract. She had what's called repudiated the contract, and ARN accepts that repudiation by terminating the contract. But the information that you have, if correct, suggests that the fact she couldn't no longer work with Kyle Sandilands is not necessarily, or would not have necessarily, been fatal to her ability to perform the services contemplated by the contract into the future. And so it would weaken ARN's position on my analysis of things, if that is correct.
Look, it's obvious ARN want out of these contracts. So I want to get to that in a moment, but let's talk Kyle. He's been suspended for serious misconduct. He's been given 14 days to remedy the situation, which would take us up to Tuesday. But his
Yes.
statement this week says he's been banned from contacting Jackie and staff. So how can he remedy the situation? And it doesn't even sound like he's been told how he could remedy the situation.
Yeah, so that's a common clause in a contract, or common part of a serious misconduct clause, where they say to the person providing the services, bearing in mind neither Kyle nor Jackie are employees. They provide their services, and this, as you know, Rob, is common in the media industry, where people provide their services through service companies. But a contract of that kind, it's common to have in the contract a clause that says, if we're going to terminate for serious misconduct, we'll give you 14 days to remedy the breach if it's capable of being remedied. So that's a common clause. In terms of not being able to speak,
what does a remedy look like in this case?
That's a great mystery, actually, Rob, in this case, as to what a remedy might look like. It could have potentially looked like some sort of rapprochement with or reconciliation with Jackie, so that Jackie could work with Kyle. So that might have been
terminated her contract, so she can't.
But they terminated her contract, and so he's not able to put those pieces back together because the contract is terminated. It is not uncommon to say to an employee, and appreciating Kyle's not an employee, but a worker, where you've got a contentious situation, particularly where one is making an allegation or a claim against the other that they've bullied them or feel unsafe working around them. And I'm not suggesting that has occurred here, but speaking generally in those sorts of situations, the employer will say to the employee against whom an allegation or assertion has been made, don't contact other staff members. In particular, don't contact the complainant. So that aspect, generally speaking, is not that unusual. Even though, of course, we all understand, and I don't think there's any doubt about this, Kyle and Jackie obviously had a very, very close bond and close relationship beyond that of most employees or colleagues. But nevertheless, that's not an uncommon direction to not contact other staff members, or in particular, the other staff member who you're upset in some way, as a protective measure, or as a measure where the employer believes that it would just magnify or compound the situation. But of course, in doing that, there is an argument, and Kyle's presented that argument in his very interesting statement the other day, which is, well, you've denied me the opportunity to fix the situation. Because I couldn't call Jackie or contact Jackie and try and reconcile, that's denied me the opportunity to remedy the breach. Interestingly, now that Jackie's contract has been terminated, query whether, in fact, they could direct him not to contact Jackie, because Jackie's no longer
works
on ARN's books. The contract's over, so she no longer has any connection or association with ARN, it seems, as far as we're aware.
That's a very good point. So based on what we know publicly, and you've made the point, none of us have seen the contract, so we don't know all the details.
All qualified in that way.
So we've qualified that. But look, I'm the layman here, but it doesn't seem to me like ARN have cause to sack either of them. Based on Kyle was being Kyle, this is behaviour that happened on the show a million times before. They've had similar arguments.
They have.
You know, their personal becomes part of the show. That's the shtick of it. That's the entertainment.
That's right.
So to call it a serious misconduct, why wasn't he pulled off air immediately? He did
I think that's a very strong point, Rob, that serious misconduct generally in employment situations, again, appreciating this is slightly different to that legally, technically. But in employment situations, if you're going to terminate somebody's employment or engagement for serious misconduct, it needs to be conduct that is inconsistent with the continuation of the employment or the arrangement. And the market statement, going back to that ARN market statement, which is incredibly instructive in this matter, because they can't gild the lily, they need to be technically accurate, entirely accurate about what they've done. If you go back to that, it refers to Kyle's conduct or Kyle's behaviour on the broadcast of 20 February 2026. So it refers specifically to that exchange. Now, interestingly, that exchange occurred. It was on the radio, so everyone heard it, and they knew it was a serious matter because they didn't include it as part of the day's podcast. And, it garnered a lot of immediate attention. It's very clear Jackie was upset. So what did they do? They didn't suspend him then or take him off the air then or put him on leave then, as perhaps they should have, if they are contending that it is conduct inconsistent with the continuation of his employment or engagement. They left him on the air. And they left him on the air for a further 7 working days. So it occurred on a Friday. He was back on air on the Monday. All that week, bar a Thursday. And the reason he was away the Thursday was a sick day. And then on air the Monday, the Tuesday, and then at I think 5:30 p.m. or something on the Tuesday, that's when the ARN statement was issued and the suspension was known. Obviously, the suspension was not in effect Tuesday morning, but it was in effect Tuesday afternoon. But if this conduct was so objectively serious, it raises the question, why was he allowed back on air on Monday? Why wasn't he suspended or put on leave with pay pending the outcome of the matter on the Friday after the show? I don't expect him to have been pulled off the air literally, as it unfolded.
Sure.
But certainly after the show on the Friday, when it was very clear Jackie was distressed, she had a visceral reaction to what had been said to her. Why not take him off the air then? So if this is conduct that is inconsistent with the continuation of the engagement, I think that's a serious matter that ARN will need to address. There's also the question of the objective seriousness. As you've said, Rob, they've had similar exchanges like this before. They had one, I think, in May 2025, and nothing, as far as we know, nothing was done then. We don't know, but it doesn't seem like there was any disciplinary action taken against Kyle at that stage. And the cut and thrust of their relationship, their arguments, their tensions, that's all part of the show. It's part of the fabric of the show. So there is and I think a fair argument that Kyle should have ventilated these matters off air and not done it on air, but he has done it on air before, and Jackie's very candid on air, and it's part of that fly on the wall quality that gives the show part of its appeal.
That's the point. I want you, though, right now, to pretend you're a lawyer for ARN. ARN want out of this contract. Previous management did the $200 million deal, $10 million each, although, just for clarity, it's reported it's around $8 million with bonuses and stuff. But let's just use the
a lot of money either way, Rob.
Yeah. Right? They want out of it because it's taking up a big chunk of their revenue and profits and all that kind of stuff. And they've got revenue problems because advertisers are boycotting all that kind of stuff. They've got mad effing witches. So ARN want out. Now, lawyers are looking for any reasons. This has been their in, right? This has been the wedge.
Yes.
So if you're the lawyer trying to look for outs, is any of this holding up, or are you just sort of wishing on a dream that, you're going to end up in court and maybe you end up with a lower payout?
Well, that's part of it. It's leverage. It may well be leverage. I want to speak generally. When making these sorts of decisions, it's not the case that the company necessarily thinks there is no legal risk and that what they're doing is absolutely, undoubtedly going to hold up in court. So I'm speaking, to be clear, I'm speaking generally.
Mm-hmm.
So companies will assume a degree of risk if they want to take certain commercial actions, including getting out of a contract they might want to get out of. So they will assume a degree of risk in taking that step. And sometimes taking that decisive action will give them leverage to get a better commercial outcome, to try and settle the matter for less than 100 cents on the dollar. And so just turning, if I was ARN's lawyer, speaking hypothetically and really looking at these things in a general sense, but But nevertheless, adopting the facts in this case. With Jackie, I wonder whether Jackie might have fallen into a little bit of a trap. And just setting aside the very useful information, the very interesting information you've garnered about the contract, but Jackie might have fallen into a bit of a trap by saying, I can't work with Kyle Sandilands. And so they've said, well, you've evinced an intention not to honour the contract, not to be bound by the contract that requires you, on one view of things, potentially, to have to work with him or cooperate with him in some way or the like, just setting aside the information you have today, which I think would weaken this argument potentially significantly. But they might say, well, she's repudiated the contract, evinced an intention not to provide the services because she's unable or unwilling to do so. And so, bang, we've got this repudiation, and that gives us a right as the innocent party. If she's repudiated, ARN are the innocent party, they can terminate the contract. So they've gone, bingo, let's take our chance and do it. That's a possibility. Speaking generally, that's a possibility. With Kyle, I think their case is, I think their case is got some issues. They've got some hairs on it in relation to Kyle, but it could be that what they focus on is not so much the objective seriousness of the words and the tone in which they were delivered, etc. So, I think obviously it was less than ideal, but Kyle didn't shout at her.
No.
Kyle didn't use expletives at her. Kyle wasn't, really red with rage or anger. It wasn't.
That was just another day on the Kyle and Jackie O show.
It was pretty much like, it was obviously a tense exchange. So the objective seriousness of it, I think ARN have a difficulty there, and the fact that they kept him in situ, they kept him on air. But to your point, what would ARN argue? They might argue, well, Kyle has engaged in conduct that you don't focus on the perhaps objective seriousness of it, you focus on the effect of it. And the effect of it was such that it rendered, it had this catastrophic effect of rendering the workplace untenable for the person with whom he had worked so closely for so many years. It led her.
Then the problem is they terminated her contract when she made a complaint.
Well, they're not necessarily inconsistent notions or concepts legally. I understand what you're saying. It makes it look like if she's the victim, then why have you terminated her contract? If she's the innocent party, why is her contract being terminated? They can be terminated for different reasons, and indeed that's what they're looking at doing potentially. They're not suggesting she's engaged, obviously, in any serious misconduct, because she simply has not. But I think theirs is based, as far as can be inferred from the market statement, it looks like they've terminated on the basis of an asserted or an alleged repudiation by Jackie. Could be wrong on that, but that's what it looks like. With Kyle, it's about serious misconduct. So they need to make good the claim that on the 20th of February, because that's what the market statement said, it focused on the 20th of February. It's not a pattern of conduct or a series of
that's
conduct.
the key.
20th of February specifically. And so I think they would probably need to focus not so much on the objective seriousness of what was said, which is low to mid-level, particularly against the backdrop of that show, in the context of that show, but the effect that it had on the co-host and rendering the workplace or the environment such that it led her to form the view that she could no longer work with him. And that might be what they're hanging their hat on. It's not the way that misconduct is conventionally analysed, but I think that's probably their strongest point. And also that whilst he might not have raised, if I was acting for them, I'd say, well, while Kyle didn't raise his voice, he didn't shout, he didn't, it wasn't stereotypical bully behaviour. What he said was pointed. What he said was highly critical. What he said was offensive and objectionable to Jackie. And he ought, having regard to his knowledge of Jackie, he's worked with her for 25 years. They were undoubtedly, close colleagues and by all accounts, close friends. He ought to have known the effect that what he was saying would have had on her. And nevertheless did it. And more than that also, too, Rob, if you look at the text of what he, and no doubt, if his contract's terminated for serious misconduct, that script of what occurred, that transcript of what occurred on 20 February and the audio recording, that'll be poured over, more than the Zapruder film, the JFK assassination film. It'll be poured over with in great detail. So I think what that will show is that Jackie, pretty early on in that exchange, made it clear that she was having a visceral reaction to it. She was very, very distressed. And so the claim around serious misconduct might be not that he necessarily initiated the discussion. I mean, its catalyst was a pretty anodyne source all around her interest in astrology. Not that he initiated it so much that he got a little bit annoyed with her because allegedly she wasn't paying attention. She denies that, of course. But actually because she said, Kyle, please stop this, or words to that effect. You don't do this. This is not fair. Would you stop? And she said that repeatedly. Kyle, stop this. And he wouldn't. And he wouldn't. And so that might be where the serious misconduct lies. Not so much the initial raising or ventilating of the issue, but the manner in which he did it in circumstances where Jackie made her discomfort and her distress clearly known, and he wouldn't stop, and he didn't stop. That might be their argument around objective seriousness. So sure, he didn't shout, he didn't swear at her, nothing like that, but he knew his words were pointed. It was a very strong criticism of her.
Yeah.
And he knew it was upsetting her, yet he persisted. And the effect of him not stopping, the effect of him doing it, is that she then formed the view that she could no longer work with him. And so that might be the crux of their serious misconduct argument.
Michael, it is absolutely fascinating. We could talk all night about this.
Good, Rob.
Mate, I need a drink and a good lie down after that. Michael,
so do I. Enjoy.
Thank you for joining us on Tipsy Thursday. Wow.
Cheers, Rob. Talk soon. Thank you.
Have you checked out the latest range of McKnight Tonight merch? You could look sexy in a T-shirt or even one of these caps. Or you could have a Rob's Rant with me every day by getting your own mug. But maybe you're the kind of person who prefers a back-end quickie. Well, you can get them all and more at mcknighttonight.myshopify.com. That's mcknighttonight.myshopify.com. Get some merch, help us out, and you'll look good doing it.